to discuss that one parable where, or one story where the people came to Jesus and they brought to him the adulteress or the adulterer woman, and he said he was without sin, cast the first stone.
Oh, I forget exactly how that started, but they were asking, "What should we do about this person?" And the elders said, "The Bible says we should stone such people because they deserve punishment for their sinful behavior." And so the question is, what did Jesus do? And the first thing that he did was he knelt and wrote in the sand. In other words, he didn't engage them in any kind of confrontational uh, dialogue. He wanted to stay unhooked. He didn't want to write a story about their arrogance and their assholiness. So he wanted to get free of that. So he didn't pass judgment on them, nor did he pass judgment on the woman. He knelt and wrote in the sand. And then it was only after he got unhooked and he let go of any stories that he had either about her or about the religious leaders. He then stood up and he was open to an inspired thought. And that's when he said, "If there's anyone here who's without sin, you can cast the first stone." And again, it's very important to see in the story that instead of standing there and just looking them in the eye and letting them get involved in a who's right and who's wrong and are you criticizing us, he knelt again and wrote in the sand. And as he was writing in the sand, um, they turned and dropped their stones, turned and walked away because he didn't participate with them in their world of judgment and condemnation and punishment. And oh yeah, it's very interesting also that the story says starting with the eldest. In other words, those who were most advanced in their own growing up, in their own upgrading of their software, the ones that are most advanced in their own inquiry, they began to see more clearly. They were the first to see more clearly. And beginning with the wisest, they dropped their stones and walked away. And then Jesus stood up and said to the woman, I forget exactly what he said, but basically he then said to her, oh yeah, that's right. He said, "Did they not condemn you?" And she said, "No." And Jesus said, neither do I. And go and sin no more. In other words, now that you're free of that world, don't get hooked back in it. Go and sin no more. In other words, I'm not going to say it's bad or now you're better. It's just that uh, there's no point. There's no point in continuing. It's neither good nor bad. There are consequences of living in that kind of world, and go, because if you get hooked into it again, next time you might get stoned.
I'm laughing because of something else. But okay.
That's it.
So I remember when I heard a pastor talk about this passage, he said that probably those people who wanted to stone her were the ones who she was having sex with.
Well, that's certainly a possibility, but the point is they were participating in the same world, that same way of thinking, that same software. So whether or not they were the ones that were sleeping with her is irrelevant. Whether they were or weren't, they were still living in the same world.
So they were what software did they have that they were they trying, and then were they, it was a superior, inferior, and how did Jesus step out of that software? What did he because a lot of people will look at this and say, "Ooh, look at that! Jesus is like, he's the man. He knows how to. He one up them. He's a superior one, and he told those guys, and now they all look like idiots, and now Jesus looks like the man. That's one common interpretation.
Yeah, well, that's the reason why he knelt and wrote in the sand. And I used to ask people, "What do you think he wrote in the sand?" And I suggested, well, maybe he wrote in the sand, "Should I condemn her, or should I condemn the men, or should I ignore the men and their problems, or should I ignore the woman, or which is better, to condemn them or to ignore them and tolerate them, or none of the above?" And once he got to none of the above, then he could stand up and talk to them. He got hooked from all human created, interpersonal created options. And once he got unhooked from all of those options, he stood up and responded transpersonally.
Said, what was you saying?
Yeah, without judgment. He discerned very clearly what needed to be said and what needed to be done. So he said what he needed to do, and then he did what he needed to do, which was to kneel again and write in the sand so as not to get hooked into right, wrong, good, bad judging.
Yeah, that's exactly. So you said he didn't ignore them, he didn't condemn them, he didn't
tolerate it.
But he had an inspired response because he looked at all the options, but then he said something that made them all break free of their.
Yeah, but he had to break free first of all of those options, all the interpersonal, all the normal human options. He needed to break free in his own consciousness, and then he could stand up and respond with an inspired both verbal and action response.
So it's important for people to kneel in the sand.
Yes.
What does that represent, to kneel in the sand? To break free of?
Yeah, it's to clear your mind of all stories that you're telling yourself, all judgments of either good or bad, right or wrong, whose fault is it, all of that stuff that we normally do when we're confronted with interpersonal issues.
Okay, so speaking of interpersonal issues, Grandpa, is there such thing as a relationship?
Well, there is a relationship that's created by your imagination. We can imagine that we have a relationship. So you go back to, it's kind of a long story, but I've said before, I love you is a lie. I don't love you is a lie. And I don't know whether or not I love you is a lie. And relationships are based on the assumption that I love you. Now, if I love you is a lie, what's the truth? The truth is, sometimes I'm loving. Sometimes I'm free enough to be loving. I'm free enough to be in the flow. And sometimes I'm not. So, relationships are built on the lie that I love you. But when you understand the truth that sometimes I'm loving, then I'm in the flow. So that there's not a relationship then. There's a mutual participation in the flow.
Yeah, that's that, Grandpa?
No.
So, I love you is a lie. So if someone, let's say I love this girl. I say I love this girl. What do I mean?
Well, see, there is an authentic opening of one's eyes, and suddenly you see a person for who they really are. And that's when we often say, I love you. Because in truth, what you're saying is, I'm seeing you as you really are. and I'm seeing us as we really are. We are mutual participants in love. We are mutual participants in the love of being loving. So the truth is, when you say I love you, the truth is what you're saying is I am seeing you lovingly. And love is made real in this eternal moment of seeing clearly.
Should you say I am seeing you lovingly, or should you say seeing you lovingly is what is happening?
Yes. Yeah, that would be the truth, but that's not very romantic.
All right, you want to do another video?
So it's useful to say I love you until both of you are capable of understanding what you really mean when you say I'm seeing you lovingly.
All right, you ready to make another video with this?
Yeah.